story begins in the midst of war, as German soldiers invade France. The streets are filled with fear and chaos as Nazi troops intimidate the local citizens, wary of potential uprisings. Among the frightened civilians, one desperate resident, unable to bear the sight of their neighbors being threatened, falls to their knees, pleading with the soldiers for mercy. Not far from this scene, a man named Ryder finds himself in the heart of the turmoil. The tension escalates rapidly until suddenly everything vanishes. Ryder awakens abruptly, no longer on a battlefield, but in a small hotel room in an unfamiliar city. The year is now 2024. Confusion grips him. The war had only been a dream, yet something feels off. Ryder cannot recall who he is. His own identity remains a mystery, and he has no memory of when or why he checked into this hotel. The only possessions in his grasp are a stack of money and a firearm, his only provisions for the day. Beyond that, he has nothing. No answers, no recollection, only an unsettling void where his past should be. Stepping out of the hotel, Ryder wanders through the city streets. As he walks, a sudden vision strikes him, a terrified little girl trapped inside a car. The image stirs something deep within him. At that moment, Ryder begins to wonder if this was a fragment of his past, perhaps a memory of witnessing a child in an accident. Before he can make sense of it, his feet lead him to a small bar owned by a woman named Shelly. Intending only to buy coffee and breakfast, Ryder is caught off guard when Shelly, with her warm yet perceptive demeanor, immediately recognizes him as an outsider. It was revealed that Shelly lives with her granddaughter, Morgan. Unexpectedly, the moment Ryder lays eyes on the young woman, he is struck by another wave of familiarity. In his dream, there had been a fearless girl who dared to defy the Nazi soldiers, and her face was identical to Morgan's. Yet Ryder quickly dismisses the thought. Surely, this must all be a coincidence. Shortly after, the morning takes a darker turn when three men enter the bar, demanding their usual tax. Among them is Jack, and as soon as Ryder sees him, his blood runs cold. Jack is yet another face he recognizes from his dream. The resemblance is too perfect to be a mere coincidence. As a result, Ryder begins to suspect that his visions are more than just random fragments of imagination. After Jack and his men leave, Ryder happens upon a newspaper headline about a missing young girl. The vision he had earlier flashes in his mind, compelling him to ask Shelly if a child had recently been in an accident nearby. However, Shelly assures him that no such tragedy has occurred in the area. Disoriented and frustrated, Ryder finishes his breakfast and leaves the bar without another word. Outside, fate seems to pull him back toward Jack, who appears insulted by Ryder's lack of fear. Before the situation can escalate, a police officer named Timmons arrives just in time, forcing Jack and his men to withdraw. Though initially suspicious of Timmons, Ryder quickly realizes that the officer is not one of Jack's associates. Instead, it is Timmons who is wary of Ryder, viewing him as a suspicious newcomer in town. Fortunately, Shelly and Morgan come to Ryder's aid, convincing Timmons that he is no threat. In an unexpected turn of kindness, Shelly offers Ryder a place to stay, her granddaughter's old room from when she was in college. Morgan even offers him a discounted rent under one condition. Ryder must help out at the bar in return. Once Ryder agreed, he couldn't suppress his curiosity about Jack. Morgan then explained that Jack was an enforcer working for a businessman named Paul. It was revealed that Paul was the owner of Sanborn, a company that had dominated the city for years. Every month, Paul collected taxes from the residents under the guise of charity. Apparently, he had an ambitious plan to transform the city into a futuristic metropolis, aiming for progress and prosperity. However, he harbored doubts, as executing this project meant displacing many of the city's poorer residents. Despite his hesitation, a renowned architect named Soch reassured Paul that the project was ultimately for the benefit of the people. What truly unsettled Ryder, however, was that Paul also appeared in his recurring nightmares. This time, Ryder envisioned a scene from ancient Rome, where Paul served as a judge sentencing Morgan to execution. In that era, Morgan pleaded her innocence, claiming she had been falsely accused. At the same time, Soch, always by Paul's side, tried to manipulate him into believing that the decision was just. Paul hesitated and left the choice to the gathered crowd. If someone was willing to defend Morgan, she would be spared. Unexpectedly, Ryder, a gladiator in that vision, stepped forward as a protector. Through these disturbing glimpses into his dreams, Ryder came to understand that he possessed a unique ability, the power to see both the past and the future. His dreams were not mere illusions, but echoes of his existence across different lifetimes. No matter the era, he was destined to meet the same people again and again. Meanwhile, influenced by Soch, Paul arranged a meeting with a council member named Roger that afternoon. He sought Roger's approval to proceed with the city project. However, Roger, known for his integrity and wealth, firmly rejected the proposal. Paul was unnerved, as he knew Roger would never accept a bribe. Desperate, Paul turned to Soch, who suggested a more devious approach, taking something precious from Roger. Later that evening, Paul visited the proposed project site. Seeing the many children living in the area made him hesitate, but Jack had already devised a ruthless plan. That night, he intended to break Roger by kidnapping his beloved daughter. Meanwhile, Detective Timmons was growing increasingly suspicious of Ryder's true identity. Under the pretense of stopping by Shelly's bar for a drink, he covertly took Ryder's used bottle. He planned to run fingerprint tests to uncover the truth about the mysterious newcomer. As for Ryder, that night he experienced yet another vision of the past, this time set in 15th century England. Once again, he was a stranger in a new land, and Morgan appeared as a humble bakery worker. Paul was there too, this time as a tyrannical ruler demanding taxes from Morgan. If she failed to pay, her bakery would be seized. Just as Paul was about to take action, a woman intervened, pleading with him to stop his threats. That morning, Ryder decided to visit Timmons' office, still haunted by his dreams. His goal was to inquire about the missing child case he had read about in the newspaper. However, he soon discovered that the case had already been resolved. The child had been found. At the same time, Ryder noticed that Timmons appeared to be investigating Paul. Curiosity sparked within him, but before he could ask any questions, Timmons warned him to stay away from Paul, insisting that anyone who got involved with him would inevitably find themselves in trouble. That night, Soch unexpectedly approached Ryder and handed him a business card, introducing himself as an architect. But Ryder was certain he had seen Soch before in his dreams. Although Soch refused to acknowledge it, he was well aware of the nightmares that plagued Ryder. Not long after, Morgan arrived at the bar, and Soch quietly took his leave. Sometime later, Ryder once again glimpsed fragments of Morgan's past, this time in the 1400s, where she was being cast out by Paul's men. Just as before, Ryder, the outsider, stepped forward to defend her. However, the vision faded too quickly, leaving him lost in thought. He barely noticed that Shelly's bar had closed for the night, and everyone had left except for Shelly herself. Noticing Ryder's troubled state, Shelly grew concerned. He looked like a man adrift, uncertain of his path. Wanting to help, she took him to a church, where they met a woman named Mrs. Mokosh. Upon their arrival, Mrs. Mokosh greeted Ryder warmly. She shared that not many people sought her out, but those who did were special. In that moment, she offered Ryder some advice that sometimes he needed to accept fate rather than constantly question everything. But before he could ask more, Mrs. Mokosh suddenly vanished. Outside, Shelly was waiting for him, and from their conversation, Ryder finally understood he had the ability to see ghosts. It was a gift that Shelly also possessed. The next day, Ryder received an unexpected phone call from Jack, offering him a job. The task was to become part of Paul's scheme to kidnap Roger's daughter. However, Paul was hesitant, unsure if Ryder could be trusted, especially since he was an outsider. But Soch assured Paul that he had already met Ryder and that no one else was more suited for the job. At that very moment, Roger appeared on television, standing before a crowd of reporters. With unwavering confidence, he declared his firm opposition to Paul's project, making it clear that he would not be swayed. He even mocked Paul, claiming that nothing he did could change his mind. The statement struck a nerve, and Paul was visibly enraged. That afternoon, Jack gathered his entire team to discuss the mission. Ryder arrived as well, having decided to accept Jack's offer. Once everyone was assembled, Jack explained the plan. They were going to kidnap a young girl named Annie, the daughter of Roger, a city council member. As soon as Ryder heard this, he was struck by a vision of a frightened girl. Jack then detailed how they would block off certain roads and force Annie's car toward the designated location. Most importantly, Jack would provide firearms to all team members, as Annie was heavily guarded by 2 armed bodyguards. The plan was set to take place the following afternoon, right after Annie finished her ballet class. After Jack finished giving instructions, Ryder returned home, only to once again experience a vision from the past. This time, he saw that the criminal scheme was influenced by none other than Soch. During the war against the Nazi army, Soch had manipulated Paul, who was a general at the time, pushing him toward reckless actions. To Ryder's surprise, Soch appeared before him once again, invading his dreams. Soch tried to persuade Ryder to take up arms once more, insisting that it was his true calling. Having existed throughout different eras, Soch also knew that Ryder was someone who would never find true love. Because of this, Soch was convinced that in the present, Ryder would remain alone. Later that night, Ryder returned to Shelly's bar and encountered Morgan. It was a fortunate coincidence, as Shelly was out with her friends, leaving only Morgan to tend the bar. At that moment, Ryder refused to believe Soch's words, because from the moment he met Morgan, he had fallen deeply in love. Their repeated encounters across different timelines only reinforced his belief that they were destined to share a love story that transcended time. However, Ryder's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a phone call from Detective Timmons, who requested a meeting. When they met, Timmons revealed that he had completed his investigation into Ryder, but had been unable to find any trace of his identity. Based on the evidence, Timmons suspected that Ryder was a former Special Forces soldier who had been erased from official records after a classified mission, possibly leaving him with amnesia. Knowing that Ryder was no ordinary man, Timmons sternly warned him to stay away from Paul and his associates. However, instead of being grateful, Ryder took offense, feeling that Timmons had invaded his privacy. The next morning, Morgan had already left for work as a lawyer. Yet, her radiant expression did not go unnoticed by Shelly, who quickly realized that her granddaughter had fallen for Ryder. But despite Morgan's happiness, Shelly remained deeply troubled. She knew that Ryder possessed a rare and extraordinary gift, but his encounter with Soch filled her with fear. After all, when Soch's name was read in reverse, it spelled chaos, a harbinger of disorder and destruction. That revelation left Ryder feeling uneasy. Determined to protect Shelly and Morgan from being dragged into his troubles, he decided to distance himself from them. Meanwhile, Morgan was meeting with Roger after receiving reports that Paul was proceeding with his project to demolish the slums. However, Roger calmly assured her that such a move would be impossible without his approval. Elsewhere, Paul wrestled with doubt over his decision. By chance, he came across a letter stating, "It is never too late to repent." The words mirrored those spoken by a white-haired woman who had appeared in his past. That woman, he realized, was none other than Shelly. It became clear that Shelly had also been reincarnated with a singular mission, to guide Paul away from destruction. Unfortunately, the kidnapping mission remained in motion. That evening, Ryder and his team gathered in a warehouse, surrounded by a stockpile of firearms. Paul arrived, attempting to halt the operation. However, to his shock, no one heeded his command. Jack, one of Paul's own men, had betrayed him and now pledged allegiance to Soch. Moments later, the plan was set in motion exactly as designed. As Annie was picked up by her bodyguards, Jack's men trailed her vehicle. At the same time, Ryder and the others stood ready at the ambush site, weapons in hand. The bodyguards soon noticed they were being followed, but were too late to escape. Their car was forced to a stop at the designated location, and they suddenly found themselves face to face with Ryder and his armed comrades. However, Jack insisted that no harm would come to Annie, as she was merely leverage in a threat against Roger. Just then, Paul arrived, ordering Annie to flee. His sudden appearance disrupted Jack's carefully laid plan, infuriating him. A fierce battle erupted. Ryder, siding with Paul, managed to gain the upper hand and ultimately shot Jack. As Jack lay dying, he experienced a sense of déjà vu, realizing that, in past lives, he and Ryder had always been locked in a relentless struggle. With Jack now dead, Ryder finally understood that Soch was the true harbinger of chaos. Soch had manipulated countless individuals, and now, seeing Ryder as a threat to his schemes, sought to eliminate him. But in an unexpected turn, Paul managed to kill Soch first. At last, Paul had chosen the path of redemption. As the dust settled, Ryder became aware of his own severe injuries. A wave of weakness overcame him just as Timmons arrived, having been summoned by Paul. Yet, it was Paul who was in even graver condition and required immediate medical attention. Emergency responders arrived soon after, accompanied by Morgan, who rushed to Ryder's side. At that moment, Ryder was flooded with visions of his and Morgan's tragic encounters across multiple lifetimes. Despite everything, Ryder had no regrets about his choices. Protecting Morgan was always worth it. Their fated love, though marked by suffering, had been the one constant across lifetimes. But the battle was not over yet. Though defeated, Soch was not truly gone. His presence lingered, hinting at a new scheme in the next life. The following day, Ryder awoke to find himself fully healed. He made his way to the church, where Mrs. Mokosh welcomed him once again. At first, he assumed this was another encounter brought on by his ability to see spirits. But then, with a solemn expression, Mrs. Mokosh revealed the truth. Ryder was no longer among the living. He had crossed into the same realm as her. It was then that Ryder realized he was witnessing his own funeral. Inside the church, Morgan and Shelly stood together, offering their final respects before his body was laid to rest. At that moment, everything became clear. Ryder understood why he had been reincarnated time and again. His previous lives had always been filled with unfinished deeds. But now, having finally used his existence to protect those he loved, he felt at peace. With that realization, Ryder chose to move on, embracing his journey into the afterlife. Moral lesson from the story: if you see the same faces in every lifetime, you're either soulmates or really bad at making new friends. Also, when ghosts give dating advice, maybe check if your crush is also immortal first.